Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and begin this final session. The U.S. Army Combat Training Centers are one of the key elements in our ability to produce combat-ready lethal brigade combat teams ready to win the close fight. Their creation over 40 years ago was considered a training revolution with the ability to replicate the rigors and challenges of sustained combat operations at the collective level. And as we've heard from several senior leaders this week, despite a transition to the division as the unit of action, our CTCs will remain a cornerstone of how we produce combat-ready brigades. As a previous OCT at both JRTC and JMRC, I can personally attest to the importance of what our CTCs provide, both to the rotational units, but equally to the OCTs that take their expertise back to the force. For our next panel, we'll hear from representatives from each of our combat training centers about trends, best practices, and how they're implementing LISCO into their rotations. In the panel today, we have Brigadier General Gardner, who is the Commanding General of the Joint Readiness Training Center, Colonel Marr, the Deputy Commander and Chief of Staff for the 7th Army Training Command, which has oversight of the Joint Multinational Training Center in Hohenfels, and finally, Command Sergeant Major Haight, who is the Command Sergeant Major for the National Training Center. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming our CTC panel. I'm going to turn it over to Brigadier General Gardner, who's going to kick off this panel session. Sir, over to you.
Afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up, perfect. Hey, so I want to start out by saying, one, I want to leave time for questions. I've heard a lot. I appreciate General Buzzard, Command Sergeant Major Gardner for inviting us here. I categorically reject that professionals talk logistics. We talk everything, all warfighting functions. And that's what I love about this conference, is that it's a bunch of professionals in a room. If you look at my bio, it starts by saying I've been a career maneuver officer. It doesn't say infantry. I've been to the artillery advanced course. I'm a proud member of the Order of St. Maurice. I also have a St. George and equivalent from the artillery, right? We have to focus on all warfighting functions, and it's why I love maneuver, because you in the audience, particularly I'm talking about those on the left, right, and at the top, your job's to bring it together. And here's the shocking thing that I reflected on while I was sitting in the audience for the past couple of days. There's only one difference between me and all of you sitting on the left side of the room. It's about 24 years of experience. That's it. Every person who's come on the stage or has spoken to you in the past 3 days is not smarter, they're not faster, they're not stronger. They have more experience and they've dedicated themselves. And so you will be here one day. You will be taking us to the future. We were all you one day. That is significantly unique about our profession and why we're here this week. I want to talk to you about just a few things. I've got a couple of slides, but I really want to get to the Q&A, and we'll see how the coordination went. Do you have any slides from us? Okay, can you go to the first one? Perfect. It is, it's there. Hey, one of the things that I like to say is that the combat training centers are the antidote to America's first battles. Now, generationally, I know that I'm talking to some deaf ears on that, because we were forced when I was a young officer to read a book called America's First Battles, and it talked about our failures in 200 years of the first fight, all the way from the Battle of Long Island through into the early 1980s, right? And then we had the combat training centers, and we started to do something remarkable, was win our first fight, because our first battles were at the combat training centers. So why are we crucibles? Why does FORSCOM want us to be crucibles? You can see that we've evolved as we talk about what you're going to experience at a combat training center. You're going to be tired. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be chased by the enemy. You're going to be chased by their UAS. You're going to be live jammed by EW. Your GPS won't work. You're not going to have time to issue orders, and you're probably going to lose communications several times, and you'll have to work your pace plan. We look at brigade combat teams in large-scale combat operations. We do live fires from the squad all the way through the brigade, to include attack aviation and all the way up to rockets and close air support. We also will employ multifunction aviation task forces, CSSBs and DSSBs, in addition to all the combat power in the brigade. There's no more Date Caucus. It's all Date Europe, Date Pacific. The opposition forces have completely transitioned. Geronimo doesn't wear beards, which is reflective of the peer threat that you are going to fight. It's immersive. There's InfoWar cells. You will be targeted at home station on social media. They have authorities, right? So if you're one of these folks that puts a lot of stuff on there about your deployment, Geronimo is going to know about it, and I know the same is for Black Horse. A lot of discussion about the transition to LISCO, so I just point this out, and you can get these from the team here or email me, and I'll shoot them back to you. But we're completely open-phased at the Joint Readiness Training Center. I was the COG there from 2018 to 2020, so I ran the training. Now I'm back as the CG. If you can't tell, I love what I'm doing, but we have evolved. It is a brigade fight, but you're fighting as part of a division. You're fighting against a peer threat, and it absolutely will follow the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the hybrid threats employed by our pacing challenge and our acute threat. When you take a look at what you will be confronted with, you will be confronted with overwhelming fires. You will be confronted with aviation from the enemy. You will have to have air guards that were discussed the other day, and you will have to have short-range air defense integrated into your formations. If you go to the next slide, please. This is really what I want to talk about. Number one in the upper left, I think anytime we talk about trends at a combat training center, we've got to remember three things and one caution. The first is, these are challenges because they're hard. I mean, if it was easy, everybody could do it. Every military could do it, right? So the point is, don't kid yourself for a second that I or General Buzzard or General Pappas or anybody got all this stuff right, because we had to work at it. We had to make choices, right? It's hard because it's hard, and you got to work at it to do it well. The second thing is we've got to put it into context when we're taking a look at what we're criticizing our brigades, battalions, and companies for what they can and can't do. Sometimes we have unrealistic expectations when we are fighting and perhaps don't have all the things we're going to go to a joint force with. But it's okay. Focus on your formation, getting your things right, and we'll just be fine. Because there's enough in the third category, which is stuff that we should be able to do well, that we just don't do well. We don't, to General Donahue's points, focus on the basics. I have listened very closely to that great leader the past 3 days. There is no indication that we have to fundamentally train the things we're training, right? We have to fundamentally change. We don't, right? Focus on these basics and we can get them right. So we had a great session earlier with company commanders. The basics of security, digging in. The funny thing is I looked at Command Sergeant Major Hansen. I still have my 5 sandbags in a trunk in my garage that are with my old rucksack, right? Like, these are the basics that we can train. But the last thing is, let's not get confused either with some of the things that we're doing in a combat training center to create an environment versus some of the things where we can actually train you in outcomes. You know, when I started out, we trained as an individual task, react to nuclear attack, right? We weren't graded on it, but we had to know how to do it. So we did swarms at the National Training Center. We've done them at both CTCs. Right now, we're not giving you a whole lot to be able to do that counterfight. That's okay. You need to make sure that you can survive and continue fighting in an environment, even if we have not caught up in all the technology, because we're going to have to fight that first fight with what we have, right? Your best bet is going to be to not get found. There's a lot of things out there in the environment that you have to not get found, have great security. So I use the Ted Williams analogy. Someone asked Ted Williams once how you hit the curveball, and he said it's simple. Don't miss the fastball. Well, how do you defeat UAS? Don't get found, and if they find you, be able to move quickly. We need to help you with that. We need to give you some capabilities, right, and we're aimed that way. What we do like to talk about at JRTC is the 7 keys to awesomeness. Keep it simple and detailed. I'd rather you come up with a frontal attack and graphics that actually lay graphic control measures and fire control measures for your platoons to be able to control that fight. Everybody has them, and we rehearse it. And you brief it in enough time to conduct low-level rehearsals. Survivable, functional, agile C2 and pace. Make sure you understand, one, how to understand that you're jamming, because usually, or getting jammed, because usually when you can't talk, you think your radio doesn't work or the guy at the other end is asleep. How do you recognize you're being jammed? Train your ability to shift to the alternate contingency, do it quickly, move out. Organizational habits, number 3 and 7 there. Battle rhythm, timeline, standardization, pre-format, CPs, and drills. I love what the current COG says. He says, checklists don't get tired. That's perfect. Have SOPs for those kinds of things. Number 4, win with HE. We heard this earlier. As company commanders, start fires with indirect fires. Better yet, you own them in light with 60s. There are battalion mortars. We also have systems that are capable of indirect fire like 320s. Okay, so start with HE. Sustainment. So how are we training our sustainment SOPs inside our brigade, battalion, companies? How do we collect the log stat? How do we fill it out? How do we transmit it, whether we have comms or don't have comms? And how do we get that log pack going? If I've got a light infantry company, how do I get those supplies down? If I have a heavy company, how do I get those supplies down? Because I've done that before for real in major ground operations. What I'd tell you is when they come for your resupply, you better be able to take it. So you've got to understand what your basic loads are, your load plans, and sustainment. And then finally, nothing at rest. This is hard business. Being a team leader in the United States Army is very hard, and company commander is almost as hard. When the unit stops and are at the short halt, you're checking your soldiers, you're doing adjacent unit coordination, you're writing the next plan. You've got to have nothing at rest because security has to go out and you have to start thinking at every moment, what if I make contact now? What is this company, this platoon, this squad gonna do in response to that contact? Thanks, look forward to your questions.
Thanks, sir. We'll transition to Colonel Marr. Please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Sir, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about 7th ATC and JMRC here this afternoon. So first, it's been great to see so many of our NATO allies in the room here, either attending the event or in the hallways looking at exhibits and doing other things. We spent a lot of time talking about relationships and interoperability. And oftentimes the starting point for at least the personal part of interoperability is here in our PME classes. So again, it's just been great to see so many of our allies here present. And second, it's a little bit intimidating being up here to talk about 7th ATC and JMRC. We've got one of our COGs in the front row, a DCOG at the podium. We've had 2 former 7th ATC commanders moving in and out of the room, and then 4 brigade commanders who, as early as really the first part of the summer, were all over the theater supporting a number of different operations. So kind of want to highlight 3 things here today. First, where we train. Second, how we train. And then third, talk a little bit about building the training environment that we need with an eye towards 2030. As we introduce new systems, new doctrine, new formations to the force, what do we need to have to be able to do that in a LISCO environment where interoperability with our allies, with our partners is going to be absolutely key to success. So before talking about the where, if we can go to the next slide real quick, I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about 7th ATC, 7th Army Training Command. We're a unique organization within the Army. We exist to build readiness for the assigned and rotational forces throughout Europe. Just kind of in short, we operate routinely across 17 different locations in 11 countries. Episodically, we're anywhere from Morocco to Estonia, from Norway all the way down to Kenya. So quite a wide footprint and a lot of responsibility there on 2 continents. Any given year, we account for about 187 1,000 soldier training days, fire about 14.5 million rounds across all of our installations. That's everything from 5.56 to Gimlers and 500-pound bombs in some locations. Supporting two operations, Operation Atlantic Resolve and then the Enhanced Forward Presence in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then participating in 25 named exercises, about a third of them which are at JMRC and at Hohenfels. The headquarters located in Tower Barracks at Grafenwehr, 5 directorates, 1 training mission, and then since about 2018, Training Readiness Authority and ADCON responsibility for first all 4 combat brigades in Europe and then 3 brigades, and that'll transition over to 5th Corps finally here in about 15 days. But JMRC at Hohenfels, the Joint Multinational Simulation Center with the hub in Kampach and in Spokes and Kaiserslautern and Vincenza. Training support activity Europe. When I talk about TACE, think of that as range control plus, but the plus is big. The plus is everything from integrated training area management to visual information services to MILCON planning and execution. Bottom line, if there's a U.S. soldier in Europe pulling a trigger or pulling a lanyard, somebody from TACE is there enabling that training. CAT-C is the Combined Arms Training Center. There are troop schools. They really focus on those schools you need to be able to operate effectively in Europe. It's different, so it has some of its own unique requirements and rules. And then our Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, again, where we're able to share some of that professional military education that we enjoy as an Army with our allies and partners. Like I said, from about mid-2018, we took on Training Readiness Authority and ADCON responsibility for the 4 combat brigades in Europe. We transitioned 173rd over to CTAF last January, and again, in about 15 days, 5th Corps will pick up all total responsibility for the remaining 3 brigades. And then I'll just highlight our 1 training mission, and that's the Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine, which is a National Guard brigade headquarters, essentially about 165 people that have been in theater since the Crimea invasion or incursion, whatever we want to call that, but they've existed since about 2015 and have trained over half of the, before the war, had trained over half of the Ukrainian brigades. I forget the total number of soldiers trained through those guys, but it's been pretty significant and has certainly contributed to the fight that we're currently in. So just back to where we train up here. You can see the box down there in the lower left-hand corner, Hohenfels. Pretty small compared to the other 2 CTCs. I think if you were to lift that up and drop it in Southern California, it'd fit nicely in the central corridor, probably between 876 and the flagpole. Land's a little bit more hard to come by in Central Europe. But one of the benefits of being in Europe is the access that we have to all the other training centers and training areas throughout the continent. Whether that is Drosko-Pomorsky up in Poland, BPDA, the steady stream of EDI money that we've received since, or really for the last decade or so, has really enabled us to make those long-term investments, working with the other allies and partners there to help develop some of their infrastructure in the training areas to benefit our forces, and then to conduct some of that multinational training that is so important. Each of our exercises up in the upper left-hand corner there have a little bit different flavor to them. Right now we're in the middle of Sabre Junction 22 with the 173rd out of Vincenza, Italy. They're operating with 13 multinational partners, allies and partners from across Europe, and just doing a lot of stuff down there with those partners. The Ready series of exercises is the off year for Sabre Junction. So every other year, either the 2CR or 173rd will do the Ready series. They'll do the Sabre Junction series the next year. Allied Spirit's unique. Allied Spirit is where we take a multinational brigade and we plug a U.S. formation up into that brigade. Most of these elements, you've got a brigade headquarters, U.S. brigade headquarters with multinational elements and the down trace. Allied Spirit flips that on its head, and then finally K4 is the Kosovo mission rehearsal exercise. For those of you that remember K4-1 back in the late 90s, we're about ready to play the 31st iteration of that TV show here pretty soon. If we go to the next slide, please. Talk a little bit about how we train. So in order to squeeze as much money out of every training dollar that we get and to maximize the return on the investment, it's expensive. We all know that. It's expensive to put a brigade in a CTC. In order to maximize the return to that, and leveraging, again, that training enterprise, not just a CTC, not just a simulation center, not just a set of ranges, but leveraging that training enterprise that we're fortunate enough to have in Europe. We build flank units, constructive, so we have live brigade headquarters operating to the north and south of that live maneuver brigade in the box. The darker green right there in the middle with the U.S. flag, that's Hohenfels. And so the brigade to the north of that is a live headquarters, but it's in the constructive environment. We can put a brigade to the south of that, 2 brigades to the south of that. Typically, for about all of our rotations, we will have a division HICON element that is coming from a NATO division. So we've just recently had the 10th Panzer Division from Germany and the 18th Mechanized Division from Poland have both participated in that. And then 12th Cab is part of every operation, working with that HICON in the 0 days leading up to the X days to shape the deep fight and to get good reps and steps for our aviators out there. We talked a lot about interoperability, just kind of my foot stomp and pitch on interoperability. If you look at the map on the far right-hand side of the screen right there, that's just a snapshot of interoperability in terms of our simulations with allies and partners. If we're going to be interoperable on the battlefield or a future battlefield during operations, we got to be able to be interoperable when we train. And that's kind of the status of where we are right now. Countries in green, namely the countries on the eastern flank of NATO who purchased JCATs a long time ago, we're fully interoperable with them. On the yellow side, not so much. Those are either national systems like SWORD or Abacus, or countries that frankly don't have a simulation capability that we're not able to work with. Sticking with that theme on, you got to be interoperable in training to be able to be interoperable on the battlefield. Miles is about the same way. It's about a 40-40-20 split. About 40% of our allies use Miles or have something compatible with Miles, or they use ULAs, another 40%, and the other 20% either a national solution or they don't instrument their training at all, and they're not able to receive the quality feedback that the OCTs are able to give all of the units that are out there. So again, just from an interoperability standpoint, we spend a lot of time backward engineering interoperability, and when we do that, it usually has 2 outcomes. 1, it's expensive, and 2, often delivers a suboptimal result. And what we really need from industry, and don't see quite as many of those folks in the audience today that we had earlier on this week, but we really need interoperability to be factored into the requirements phase of anytime we develop a new system or we introduce new software or hardware to the battlefield. And oftentimes we miss that. Okay, and then let's go to the last slide, please. I'm not really going to talk to this slide a whole lot. We've had about 30 of these slides over the last couple of days, some better than others. Our list of kind of short abbreviated list of observations from the fight in the Ukraine. A lot of these are taken from daily interaction with the Ukrainians we have at GRAF. Since about April, we've had a steady stream of Ukrainian soldiers through GRAF, Ukrainian units, training on all of the systems, all the equipment that we're pushing across the border into Ukraine. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of our modernization efforts, some of the things that we're doing within 7th ATC, again, to move to that training area that we need to support some of our 2030 objectives. So sorry, I lost my place here. So the first system, or first thing just to highlight, ITAD's multinational interoperability. So again, getting back to that interoperability thing, ideally we want to see Europe as a training center, not Hohenfels, not Chinku, not Smardon, not NSTA, but Europe as a training center. And that supports USERA's connected training strategy. And basically, connecting training strategy in a nutshell is you can take several different brigades in several different discrete locations, connect them in real time through, you heard it earlier, the persistent training environment over the MPE backbone, the mission partner environment that has become that federated network for NATO, or is quickly becoming that. Where they can share a common scenario and a common operational picture. So that makes that 20 by 10 box in Hohenfels a whole lot bigger when we're able to do that. We're getting closer. We still have some work there to do, especially with respect to that Miles interoperability and being able to synchronize and link all of our systems. Number 2 is creating that realistic information environment. The centerpiece to that is something that NTC and JRTC have had for some time. It's the IC3NS, the independent, commercially compatible cellular network system. We're able to replicate the effects of cell phones in the battle space, either being able to collect on them, target them, do other things there. I think we're supposed to field that in FY29. There's a decision point to pull that left to FY24. We need it before 29, especially in Europe with what's going on. Number three, and I'll admit to being way out of my depth when it comes to the science and technology behind our simulation systems, but as we continue to field the geolictic systems that are out there, or fully incorporate that, making sure that we have the cross-domain solutions that allow us, I know cross-domain solution was kind of a dirty word earlier, but in some cases you need those to allow those allies and partners to join in and to facilitate that connected training strategy. Fourth has been brought up a number of times, the ability to monitor the electromagnetic spectrum and to show units what they look like in that electromagnetic spectrum. And then finally taking a hard look at our OPFOR. And that came out of one of our recent conferences we had there, the Conference of European Training Centers. But to standardize OPFOR, we're fortunate. A lot of our allies do not have the ability to dedicate a unit or an organization to a permanent OPFOR presence to learn what the enemy's doing and to replicate those effects. We do, and so we're working with allies and partners, again, to standardize that. And we're looking just within our OPFOR 1-4 Infantry Battalion, just to make sure we're replicating the signatures that units need to see. At the end of the day, the whole lessons learned arrow there is again, mislabeled. They're observations. At the end of the day, we need to replicate in our CTCs Russia's best day, not some of the things that we've seen either during phase 1 or phase 2 of their attacks. So with that.
Thank you, Colonel Morrow. We'll now transition to Command Sergeant Major Haight. Please go ahead.
Leaders, Command Sergeant Major Haight from the National Training Center. It's an honor and privilege to be here today to represent the National Training Center. I got one slide here, if you could go to it. And what I'm going to talk about is how the National Training Center is adapting to multi-domain operations. And what we're doing is four major functions: a transparent battlefield, increasing effects of enemy fires, division shaping operations, and focused regeneration. NTC is adapting to the changes in the character of war observed in Ukraine and other recent conflicts. We have incorporated TSM 800 drone swarms, IV-2 drones, Gray Eagle, and Puma. But what I want to highlight on my slide, if it comes up.
Yes, Sergeant Major, I'm not sure that we had a slide. We'll, if you don't mind, we'll just keep working off of
Okay, so I had a slide, and we had a picture, and it really just demonstrated low orbit Earth satellites, and what it represented was nothing more than the ability to see Blue Force obstacles across the entire battlefield from over the shelf, local purchase stuff. And then I had an additional picture up there of in the right quadrant of a signal system spectrum detection, which allows you to see the BCT from 35 kilometers out, and again, an unclassified system. I know everyone's aware and seen the drone swarm that we had showed on Twitter the other day. Just another way we're replicating it. That thing was fully armed with miles and 40 millimeters. It has a capability to drop small Nerf footballs to see some battlefield effects with it, and it is armed with miles, so you can shoot it down with small arms at 150 meters in the air. I'm going to move on to increasing effects of enemy fires. NTC has increased the volume and accuracy of fires by 5-fold. It increased attacks on command posts, and for an example, over the last 9 training days, command posts were targeted 54 times, of which 29 of those were by indirect fire. Additionally, we're assessing leaders as casualties for short periods of time to allow for the one-man up drill, next man up drill. And we created an adjudication system for artillery, so when you get engaged with indirect fire, your mile system blocks up for 30 to 60 seconds, and you have no direct fire capability. And what we're really trying to get you to do is utilize the battle drills and have you move to alternate subsequent battle positions and get out of indirect fire range. Additionally, some of the larger buildings we equip with miles to try to incorporate, have Blue 4 put more fires on buildings and rubble buildings, and it can see credit for their work. I'll move on to focused regeneration. All units will leave the National Training Center at 90% OR rate. This is closely managed by senior trainers through a rigorous QA/QC program. For an example, we had a rotation recently with 100 fully, with 50 tanks and 100 tanks and Bradleys down. They left the National Training Center after 16 days with 86 fully mission-capable vehicles. A couple of ways we get after it is we have the gold miner team in the 916th Brigade provide feedback, ESR accuracy, and parts availability. National Training Center is really all in on assisting units and getting after the maintenance aspect. And I'm not going to cover the division shaping operations because it was covered in the last brief more effectively. So I'd like to open up for questions, sir.
Great, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your comments. With that, we'll go out to the audience for questions. Same rules of engagement as we've been using throughout the conference.
Gentlemen, Colonel Chuck Burnett, Special Operations Center of Excellence. I saw on a couple of slides there was a comment as far as RSOF integration or interoperability. Can you give some examples of what you're seeing that's working, and what do you think we need to do to change to improve for the future employment of the force? Thanks.
So at least for, I can't speak to JMRC, but the Special Operations Training Directorate, SOTD, stationed at Fort Polk, controls special operations at both the National Training Center and the Joint Readiness Training Center. And so typically what you can expect to see is civil affairs PSYOPs, A teams with B teams deployed for every rotation. They've got deals cut with local ports, other significant facilities. So as part of shaping, sometimes it's to help get access as part of the larger road to war. We will see special operations conducted not just at the training centers, but in the surrounding areas and states, which is actually pretty cool. Then what we're seeing typically is special operations detachments that are employed inside the box, but sometimes to a flank of the Blue 4, the rotational training unit that's in the box, that are, again, working on their own training objectives to essentially work at the CJTF to core level type shaping tasks. But then as you peel that down, we'll typically put an A team somewhat synchronized to where the brigade in the box is going to operate, so that they get a feel of the power of understanding their adjacent units to include special operations forces, so that aviation with SOF, brigades with SOF are working. And then finally, within about the past year, and Sergeant Major, I'm not sure if you know how long NTC's been doing it, but we're actually starting to put A teams in the box as red. So not only do we have SOF teams working for blue with essentially resistance, but we now have SOF going in the other side, training resistance on the opposite side. So it's kind of SOF on SOF and SOF OP4 now with our Geronimo working against the brigade combat team, if that kind of gets at some of your question.
Similar to General Garner's last comment, one of the things at JMRC that we've been successful in doing is Sabre Junction 22 ongoing right now. The OP4 battalion that we have one for will often augment it with multinational partners, with allies. So right now we've got a Macedonian infantry company with Warrior, as well as a Lithuanian SOF. And so again, that Lithuanian SOF element operating within the population, doing some of those unconventional warfare type drills with the civilians on the battlefield with the population, just exposing the rotational unit to a different threat, looking at a different flank, looking at a different problem set that they have to work with now or work through.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next question, please. Go ahead, paddle number one.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Captain Conser from JMRC. Quick question for the panel. One of the things we see, especially at the battalion and brigade level in large-scale combat operations, is the inability of main command posts to stay mobile and relevant and protected in the fight. What are some things that you've seen at the CTC's best practices to maintain the survivability and ability of those main command posts.
From an NTC perspective, one, we've pretty much banned tents, so we don't let anyone operate in tents. We see very spread out, dispersed talks, significantly reduced in size. The problem is that they do have a lot of problems with collaboration. Great camouflage usage. We've seen an increase in use of terrain and tying things together. But ultimately, you know, like I said, we continuously target them until they reduce their size and shape. So I tell you, there's a lot of ways to get after it, but we have a long way to go to really figure it out how to put all our systems and processes in place in such a small area.
You know, first of all, I think it goes back to what I said earlier in opening. That is an Army problem that I think if you talk to General Donahue, General Pappas, that is something we have got to get better at collectively. It's not just what you do in companies, battalions, brigades. It's also what we as the Army give you and how we train that. But directly to the question, the more successful brigades are excellent at camouflage, noise, light, camouflage. They look at function before form. General Bernabe in a previous session that we did had a really great comment about, you know, everybody expects a seat. Well, maybe everybody doesn't get a seat. Maybe everybody doesn't get their own computer, right? How do we work this in terms of priorities of work? And how do we employ equipment? You know, one of the things that I used to hate was the old drash tent. What was the first thing you had to put up in those command posts? It was the tent, right? As opposed to getting communications up and then getting PLI feed up and then your fires up, right? And so the better units are able to move because they work in terms of priorities of work. They set up the priorities, and then there's always a discomfortable time, an uncomfortable time where inside a commander's head, they know they should move, but they really don't want to because it's tough, and you've just got to move. You've just got to move or you're gonna lose it all. Going modular would be the last thing. What do you need at what places? And so the more folks are clustering capabilities, the better. But it's getting smaller, faster, priorities, and a lot of that it's difficult, and what you really need to do is just get all your stuff out there and start working through it. And again, brigades that have practiced that tend to do better and don't get found at the CTC. It does happen. I got a former Geronimo 6 down here. He'd tell you in 2 years there's some brigades and battalions he could not find.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next question, please. And I have a couple from the virtual. So, gentlemen, this question has to do drilling down below the brigade level and some of the macro trends. If we go down to the company level and below, what are some of the trends you're seeing, and what must company level leaders get right to be successful? And Command Sergeant Major, I'm sure you have a list of the soldier skills and small unit leader skills that we got to get right too. So company level and below, what must we get right?
So the first thing we get better at is at the National Training Center is maintenance, and really that is a culture that gets established, you know, at your home unit and home station, and you have to drive it through the whole process. That is one. Two, combining arms at the company level. You know, incorporate your mortars, flying your Ravens, getting everything and putting everything in fight. Because I mean, what we see a lot of is everyone's playing an instrument, but no one's playing together in an orchestra. So we see a whole lot of that, and that can only happen in sets and reps at, you know, the platoon and company level prior to coming out to the training center.
I'm a general, I don't know anything, so I'm going to turn it over to a company OCT at JRTC.
Good afternoon, Captain Miller. I'm a company OCT, Task Force 1 with JRTC. Some of the biggest trends we're seeing with companies is one, lack of discipline when it comes to security. Not doing that local RNS patrol, not sending out LPOPs. Another thing that's really causing a lot of friction is non-functioning command posts. They fail to maintain good communications across multiple spectrums with battalion, which enables their ability to have a good understanding of the COP. So there's huge seams within their adjacent units, and they're not operating off of updated warfighting products. That's generally about it.
Good job answering on the spot there. Awesome. Any other on that question?
I want to add one more thing for the
Thanks, Sergeant Major. Go ahead.
specifically the mechanized formations is we need to spread out. So we talk a lot about masking, but at the platoon and company level, sometimes we tend to travel so closely together. And I challenge a lot of the people in this formation sitting in this auditorium today because you can make the difference. You can take your platoon or companies out to the field, spread them out. And what I think I've seen work the best is those who demonstrate what right looks like. Is instead of like just continuously talk about it, take your organization out to the field, put them in the formation you want to see, teach them bounding, and show some kind of demonstration so when they get out to the training centers, they're already ready to execute, and you can continually build in those blocks.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. Next question, please. And while the audience is looking for the next, or thinking about the next question, one question that I had, and I think could be relevant to everybody here in the room, I know that the live fire still plays a significant portion of each rotation. Can you talk about what you've incorporated in terms of LISCO into the live fire and what that live fire exercise looks like now inside of a CTC rotation?
I think for JRTC, it's a good model for what you heard General Pappas talking about, which is how do you do multi-echelon training? That would be my first point. So for us, it is making sure that we understand the basics of fire and maneuver, and we not only attack urban objectives, but we have deliberate breaches that we have to get in as well. So it's not just about fighting in urban, which obviously was primarily where we fought. Urban and mountains were like the two places, right, between Afghanistan and Iraq. So we've got objectives that are terrain oriented. We've got the trenches, we've got the bunkers to be able to work with. But it's also being able to figure out how to mass fires, right, and have fires massed against you. So you will get attacked, you will get jammed during live fire. So incorporating those things. And then the air-ground incorporation. That was something I remember that was very important to General Buzzard when he was out at JMRC, was the opportunity to do a JAT. Everybody had to have an opportunity to do a JAT successfully, and so you can do those things at JRTC. But what's important is we've got to be able to come into live fires and understand that you get out of it what you put into it, right? So if you come and you do the programs and you don't think about things like SDZs, what's going to happen is the OCTs are going to come over to you and they're going to tell you that you got to redo your plan because you didn't effectively take a look at SDZs, REDs. You know, those things are for real. So that's kind of what we've integrated as we've gone to a brigade. It's not really platoon live fires and company live fires anymore, but the focus is on the company. And if you're interested as battalions and brigades or on staff of how to do multi-echelon training, that's what I'd say is unique about us, and I think the others as well to some degree.
A little more challenging in Europe and at HTA to do those live fires. We don't do them on the same scale that you have either at NTC or JRTC. What we usually do is we end up carving out a maneuver live fire area on the western side of GTA. Unit will go through, do their live fire there, and then deliberately transition down to the fight through some of our maneuver rights areas between Grafenwehr and Hohenfels, and then move into the Hohenfels rotations. But that being said, again, going back to training support activity Europe and what they're doing across the theater, the opportunities to do live fires integrated with your multinational, your NATO partners elsewhere, we're seeing those everywhere throughout Europe at all of those training areas that you saw on the first slide there, and a lot of development in those live fire capabilities, whether we're talking the Krivolak down in North Macedonia, Varpalota in Hungary, a couple areas that we're using, and a lot of the areas that we're developing now down in the Balkans, in Romania and Bulgaria.
So the National Training Center live fire exercise is a brigade exercise fought by battalions, consolidated as a brigade, under a brigade construct. What makes our live fire very unique is, one, we've been doing it for about 6 years now, so it's not really new. We've been doing it in our LISCO conscript. But we have a thinking enemy. So in our bunker, we have an S2 cell, and there's 2,200 targets. And what they do is they maneuver the force on the blue four based on where blue four is achieving effects. And it's pretty interesting to see how it plays out. So you really are doing the complete fight. You're incorporating the breach. You're doing a breach. You're combining arms. You're using artillery, attack aviation, and close air support. So there is a whole variety of venues to include all the dismounted objectives.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. That concludes this final session. If we could, let's please give our CTC panelists a round of applause.